Hi everyone, this is Niharika from Your Legal Career Coach. We are a mentorship platform for law students. In our YouTube channel, you'll find interviews with students and industry professionals to make your journey easier. Today we have with us Shubhangi Agarwalla. Shubhangi is currently working as a foreign associate in the Litigation and International Arbitration team at Alston Bird. After graduating in 2021 from National Law University, Delhi, she worked as a legal assistant at United Nations International Law Commission for 2 years and then as a research consultant and multiple other roles before finally pursuing her Master's of Laws degree from Yale Law School in 2024. Today, she is here to tell us about the application process at Yale Law School and how to make the best use of one's time during their master's journey. Welcome, Shubhangi. It's a great pleasure to have you on board.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Right. So, diving directly into the questions, could you start off by telling us what motivated you to gain work experience before pursuing your master's, as opposed to applying immediately after graduation?
Sure. Okay, so there are both short-term and long-term reasons. Like in the short term, like most US law schools, including Yale, tend to prefer candidates that have some amount of work experience, at least 2 years of work experience. And in many ways, once you're done with your master's degree, it's also easier to get a job when you have certain skills to offer. Um, But more importantly, there's like a common adage that the life of law is not logic but experience. I had already spent, 14 years at school and another 5 more years at National Law University, Delhi. And when you're stuck in the role of a student for such a long time, I think there's a great degree of idealism that you bring. I mean, National University Delhi was where I had like my political awakening. But I think most of my peers and my friends around me were all extremely bright and but extremely eager to change the world. And we tended to look at the world in binaries. So like it's good versus bad or right versus wrong. And I think getting any sort of practical work experience really helps you ground yourself a little further. It helps you see nuance and to recognize that even people you disagree with aren't necessarily wrong, but they're just shaped by different incentives and reasons. And I think that is extremely important, even, I mean, for life, but also before pursuing like a master's degree, because many of these universities are thriving intellectual centers, which thrives on like conversation and intellectual exchange. And you need to listen as much as you speak, and listen to people, especially those who completely disagree with you, which is honestly what a lot of my master's degree was like. And I honestly think that it helped me change my views in many ways that I would not have if I had applied directly after my undergraduate program.
Such apt reasoning. So, what were the key factors that led you to choose Yale Law School, and did you also have any other schools in mind?
Sure. So I applied to Yale, Harvard, and Cambridge, and I got offers from all three. I picked Yale, um, honestly because of at least the very thriving intellectual culture that I thought it offered, like spanning like a broad range of subject matters. It also has a very, very small cohort. We had 26 students in our cohort, and usually it's like between 25 to 27 students. But everyone in the cohort brought very serious either scholarly or professional experience to the table. I was definitely one of the youngest people in my cohort. But we had judges, we had like people who had like Rhodes scholars, deputy prosecutors in their home jurisdictions, and even professors, people who had completed their PhDs and were now applying for like a master's degree. And I think I was really excited about the possibility of being in such an environment where you're taken very seriously. Um, yeah, I think that was like the one of the prime motivating factors. And of course, like being one of the, even though I had like 2 years of work experience, I was still one of the younger members of the cohort, which produced a sense of cluelessness, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Obviously, during the master's degree, you're constantly fretting about the things you don't know and like how everyone seems to be way ahead of you. But it's also good in the sense that it gives you the space to explore. So I went in thinking that I want to do international law, but I ended up taking like a variety of courses in private law and um, constitutional theory. And I even did like a judicial internship at a district court in Connecticut. And just like these very small things, I think really transformed the way I think. Um, and this is something that I would not have even encountered had I gone with a very fixed agenda of like only studying international law and then maybe doing a PhD. For instance, when I was interning at the District Court of Connecticut, uh, I was forced to confront whether the common arguments against the jury system in India are actually tenable. And that's something that you don't think about when you're just reading, like, say, a textbook, right? So in that sense, I think there was there was a lot of intellectual exchange that took place, which was really, really exciting.
Like, so you were talking about the courses. So did you offer a general LLM or was it a specific one?
So the Yale LM is general in nature in the sense that you can choose the courses you want to take, and they generally treat you like adults, which is something that at least I wasn't familiar with in India, where there's absolutely no supervision, there's no micromanaging. You have your you have your goals in mind, and you are free to do whatever you want with it. So even if, say, for instance, you had extremely different ideas about what you want to do with the LLM when you applied, there is some degree of freedom in choosing to change that when you're there. And yeah, honestly, there are a wide variety of courses on offer, both doctrinal, interdisciplinary, and clinical, and like that flexibility becomes very helpful.
Mm. Can you tell us about the application process at Yale Law School for international students and how can one prepare for the same?
Sure. So compared to the other, I think US law schools, which also ask for like letters of recommendation and like the general LSAC process, um, the Yale application process is a little different because they don't ask you for a personal statement. Instead, they ask you for two. They ask you to answer two broad questions. For the first is, like broadly conceived, they ask you to come up with like a scholarly research agenda, and the second is they ask you to describe a moment or a conversation or a book you read that has changed how you look at the world. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing, like the actual wording of the two questions might be very different. Um, and like the first question, the research agenda, is like the longer question. The second is like a 250-word question. It is different than a personal statement because there's no space for you to really um, talk about your personal background. In the first question in the research agenda, what they're really interested in learning is they want to know how you think. And what I would suggest doing is that I think you need to understand what exactly they want from you, right? They don't want you to just come up with um, all the research that you can potentially do on a subject. What they want you to demonstrate is that you are intellectually curious. And the way you do that is by asking a good question, a question that is clear, relevant, but also intellectually ambitious. So this is not a question that necessarily has to have an easy answer, an answer that you have already come up with. Um, but something that you think has relevance in the world that you're in. Um, and the second component to the research agenda is you also have to demonstrate why your time at Yale Law School will help you think through this question more clearly. And to be very honest, I think what really worked for me is that I was really working very hard on the Harvard application. I spent very less time on the Yale application. And like very paradoxically, that actually worked in my favor because I didn't have time, to try to sound smart.
Right.
Like, because ordinarily, if you are asked to like come up with like a research agenda, like your first prerogative is to make yourself sound like you have like you are a scholar already. And in the absence of that time, I think I focused on a question that I was genuinely curious about. I spoke about the lack of legal capacity in international law across various ministries in India, and that's something that I had been thinking about for a couple of years. I know obviously people take very different approaches to this question. There are obviously people who have come up with a very compelling research agenda in the span of a couple of weeks. But I think what again is very important to focus on is that you're asking a big and an important question, even if you don't have all the answers.
Right. Moving on to the letters of recommendation part, how important are they in the application process, and what kind of recommenders should the applicants seek?
Got it. So the letters of recommendation are obviously an important component of the application process. Like other universities, they are not looking for general praise. They want detailed insight into your intellectual curiosity, your capacity for independent thought, and your potential for academic growth. But in addition to you as a student or as a lawyer, they're also looking to know a little bit more about you as a person and how you interact with people around you, and the kind of relationships you're able to form. So ideally, I think I would advise applicants to choose recommenders who know you close enough and who know your work close enough, whether it be from academia or practice. I had both sorts of letters of recommendation. I had professors at my university, but I also had people I had worked with in the past. I had a partner at Sidley Austin, um, along with a professor and like Professor D. Tladi, who had worked at the UN, write my letters of recommendation. And I think what was helpful is that all of them, because of like the various capacities in which I had interacted with them, gave the person reading my letters of recommendation a very different aspect of my personality and my work style. So I think that was extremely helpful. And I think finding a recommender who can speak about how you think, how you write, how you engage with difficult problems is something that might help you in that might help you in the application process. Um, a lukewarm letter from someone who's famous is obviously less helpful than a very passionate, detailed one from someone who really knows you.
Right. So many students worry about their academic grades while applying to top tier law schools. And how does Yale evaluate academic performance versus work experience?
Got it. So, obviously I'd be lying if I said that grades didn't matter. You have to try to get the best possible grades during your time at law school, but that's not very helpful, right? I think it can also be very discouraging because life happens. Things don't always pan out the way that you like aim for. So I think beyond also trying to get good grades, what you should also understand is what exactly do grades serve as a proxy for, right? When you are applying to these programs. What, at least in my understanding, I think what um, the person who's reviewing your application wants to know is that you'll be able to handle the intellectual demands of the master's program. Like, fortunately or unfortunately, grades serve as the easiest proxy for that. It's really hard for them to, because of the various countries that people apply from, it's really hard for them to really understand, um, the various ways that you might be smart. It's obviously not a perfect system, but it's the system we have. So I think you can also, in addition to like the grades that you have, you can also try to show the trajectory of your thinking, be it through like research assistant roles when you're in your undergraduate program, through mooting, through legal writing, which just shows that you are a curious person. You are interested in learning, um, not only what the law is, but why the law is the way it is, and what like a more ideal version of society might look like. So I think what they're really interested to know is that you are someone who cares
Yes.
um, about like about legal thinking, about the world, and have a capacity for intellectual engagement. I honestly think that's it. Um, so I would advise students who may not have perfect grades to work on these other aspects as well.
Right. So you have also
Uh,
worked
so
in. Yes, please.
yeah, honestly, I was just saying that like the values I think that I would focus on, and that, obviously it's really hard for me to give like very general advice because it really depends on person to person. But the values I think that an applicant might want to focus on is demonstrating intellectual risk taking, curiosity, and engagement.
Right. So you've also worked in multiple research assistantship roles at Yale. So how can students secure these opportunities, and what kind of work does it involve?
Right. So it's a really straightforward process once you get in. You usually have these research assistant roles with professors, and you help them either like write books, write articles, You might co-author certain articles with them, but there are also insular projects that they are involved with. So, if, for instance, one of the professors that I was working with was an advisor to a PCA arbitration, so I was helping her with research for the arbitration. And obviously, the kind of work you do depends entirely on the project that the professor has on hand. And the way you get these roles is a very transparent application process. The professor uses one of the university portals to describe the nature of the work and to talk about the kind of student that they have in mind. And you send in your CV, and then, like, if they like you, they select you. You have the option of either doing it for credit or for pay. I think for most international students, you end up choosing pay because obviously, like, every bit of money helps when you're abroad. Um, yeah, and I think it's interesting because it gives you an opportunity to work on it, to think about issues that probably you haven't thought about before, because a lot of these professors have spent their lives working on certain topics. So the way that they look at the world will obviously differ from yours, and it's really interesting to engage with them in that way. It also helps you build relationships with the professors.
Right. What clinical experiences or practical legal training did you undertake during your LLM, and how is it contributing to your growth right now?
Sure. So I think that the clinical education Yale offers, like, far surpassed my expectations. I was involved in the private law clinic, and I did some work with the Lowenstein Human Rights Project. So, like, the private law clinic, I think was extremely useful because I went in, like, I mean, at least, like, I don't know about your law school, but at least in my law school, we studied contracts and torts in a very rudimentary fashion. And that's very theoretical subjects that you don't actually um, see in the day-to-day practice of law, especially torts law, right? And the system in America is obviously extremely different. You have um, hundreds and thousands of, like, tort law cases on a daily basis. So I found it extremely challenging to engage with American private law doctrine, which is far more generative than Indian private law doctrine. But I think what my takeaway was, it got me curious about why India does not have enough jurisprudence on private law. So I think that's the key takeaway. Like, when you go to a different system than yours, you question the assumptions that you have. So, for instance, if you're used to being in a system where you don't have tort law, you have multiple other avenues. So I think rather than, like, doing a tort case, most people either get ex gratia payments, they go to quasi-judicial tribunals in India, or they try, like, a criminal complaint or a constitutional case, like a PI litigation. And I think just being outside of, like, the Indian context and being in a very different context makes you question whether that might be the ideal scenario, whether there are certain things that are getting lost in the process. So I think in that sense, it was extremely helpful. Obviously, I think there are also certain skills that you learn when you are involved in a clinic. Um, in my experience in India, there is less of an emphasis on drafting than there is on oral arguments. And I think really helped me improve my legal writing in terms of not just academic legal writing, but also in terms of producing memos and briefs, making it concise and ensuring that I'm really trying to make the best possible argument. With the Lowenstein Human Rights Clinic, I was, like, it was also in a very interesting sort of project that we were working on. We were helping farmers in Zimbabwe contest sanctions that the US government had imposed on Zimbabwe. And again, like, I think it helped, any sort of clinical education helps you step out of, like, the very two-dimensional worldview that textbooks bring and encounter these issues in real life.
Right. What role do extracurricular activities and publications such as your work with the international law and the Global South blog play in strengthening an application of the student?
I think that they play a fairly important role. I think what extracurricular work and publications show is that you have taken an initiative to broaden yourself beyond just the classroom, and you're able to look at the world beyond just grades. So whether it be through moods or writing or honestly even like sports, right? All of everything you do teaches you something, and I think that's something that they want to know. Legal writing, of course, is a very different skill set. I find that I get a lot of clarity in my thinking when I write. I started a blog because I was encountering these questions while working on international law, and I thought that the blog would help me think about these questions more critically and look at systems more holistically. It ended up being a very interesting avenue. Also to meet people with very different orientations, uh, in addition to strengthening my writing and my research. So I think in that sense, any sort of venture you take, whether it be a blog or whether it be um, like a moot court competition, or even if you're like really interested in sports and you play a sport really well, I think no matter what you do, if you just aim to put in your 100%, you end up learning a lot that I think ends up benefiting your legal career. So I think it's all about taking certain skills that you've learned from outside the classroom and showing how these are transferable skills that can also help you becoming a better lawyer.
Right. Does Yale provide any kind of support in terms of career guidance or networking or securing any internships?
To be honest, I don't think they do. I think that it's a very hands-off system. Like for instance, like I was taking the New York bar exam, and just the general sentiment around it was that, if you have a question, they'll answer the question, but you're expected to figure all these administrative tasks out yourself. Even with regard to finding jobs, I think most LLM programs across the world have now started openly advertising that this is not a way for you to get a job. Um, and you're supposed to lower your expectations in that regard, and it's honestly like a really bad market for Indian applicants, right? So in that sense, I think there is a very limited role that any university can provide in terms of helping you seek out like a job post the LLM. Obviously, there are a number of like fellowship opportunities across the world that Yale offers. You have the PCA fellowship at The Hague. You can also work with domestic or international organizations with Yale paying a lot of the stipend, and which allows you to do a broader range of work than just like working at a law firm, because you probably would not have had that sort of financial security without the university supporting you. But when it comes to finding a job in the US, I think there is a lot of the legwork that you have to do yourself. And honestly, it's all about perseverance and just sending out enough applications.
Right. Did you also apply for any financial aid or scholarships? And can you tell us about any funding opportunities that you might be aware of, which are available for international students at Yale?
Sure. So I think Yale has one of the most generous financial aid programs. As soon as you're admitted to the program, you're automatically considered on the basis of financial need. And they give you a very tailored sort of a package, which is honestly quite generous. I ended up not having to take any other like sort of financial aid from any other organization. Otherwise, I would have applied for the INLACS fellow
National
scholarship.
scholarship, right? Right. Okay. So if you had to give one piece of advice to students applying to Yale Law School for their master's program, would it be?
So, the piece of advice I would give is like, don't try to reverse engineer the perfect applicant. This is something that I have obviously been guilty of, where when you're in like your undergraduate degree or when you have just started working, you try to be the perfect applicant. You try to sound smart. I don't think that ever works. Instead, you have to figure out what you genuinely care about, and you have to be able to communicate that with clarity and conviction. I think Yale, along with most other master's programs, wants to find people who are not just high achievers, but also people who care about the world around them. And I think that is something that you should be able to demonstrate in your application.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience. I believe we have covered all we needed to know about applying to Yale Law School for masters, and this would be of utmost help to everybody watching it. So thanks again for being a part of this segment. And on behalf of ILCC, I wish you the very best for your journey ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niharika.